Alright, welcome to a behind the scenes on the Minecraft animation series that I just recently finished. And I'm going to go through, in order of release, what I did for each of the animations. So, we are in the very first scene in the entire series. There isn't really much to talk about here, but the way this Enderman disappears and reappears is it's a thing with his object. The rig already has this modifier in it, and when you slide it, it starts to slowly disappear. So I just had to slide that until it did that. So I just keyframe that to disappear, and then I move the rig. As you can see, the rig's still here, it's just invisible. And then it reappears right here. I originally had bats flying here, but then I accidentally, in the render, I just copied this shot right here. So I eventually just re-rendered it without the bats. There's not really much to say about this shot. Except, okay, so for these long camera shots, I reuse this a lot in the rest of the series. The keyframes for these long ones right here are linear, and if they weren't linear, I could show you what they'd look like if they weren't linear. If I go key interpolation mode Bezier, that's how they are when you first keyframe them, and it looks like that, which just looks terrible. Like, look at that. That's terrible. Look at that. So, setting them to be linear makes it a very completely straight line from keyframe to keyframe. Okay, not much to say about this scene. Just reuse the whole camera linear keyframe thing, and also these textures are missing, just because I animated this scene many months ago, and stuff like that happens. Literally nothing to say about this shot. It just exists. Yeah. Okay, so this file was actually originally the one where we were like setting up camp, but I accidentally overwrote the save with the one that's after this one, so unfortunately can't show anything there. I can show this next scene right here. So when he pulls this piece of slime, it's in his hand the whole time. It's right here in his hand. As you can see, it's just this tiny little thing. And right here, it's so small you can't see it. And then boom, the frame right after, the camera shot changes, and the slime ball scales right up. Similar thing with these bubbles here. They start scaled way down. You can actually see them in the finished render, I think. So here they are, and then they scale up individually. And then they scale all the way back down again. For this part, when Herobrine gets hit, I really, honestly should have added some particles there, but I didn't really know how to do particles back then. And the way this fire is dying, it just scales all the way down, and that's it. Very simple. Guess that's it for this part. Oh, look at this file. It is completely messed up. But this sword enchanted effect, this is it, basically, right here. If you want to do an enchanted effect, you can go ahead and copy this if you want. Okay, so this is the old water shader that I used to use in 2.79 for cycles render. For some reason, the view part always shows up like liquid gold for some reason. If you want to copy it, there it is. So, yeah. And basically, it just moves on one axis. And that's it for the first one. Here's the beginning of the second animation. The first one that I did using Eevee. Looks like we still have some missing textures here. For this one, I basically just took the original credits scene and then just moved some stuff around, added a dead skeleton, because why not? Oh, that's mysterious. Well, that's weird. The campfire logs are invisible for whatever reason. Oh, and this is also the new water shader that I use for Eevee now. Here's what it looks like if you want to copy it. So, there you go. I honestly think it looks really nice. And for this crawling animation, I didn't even do any planning. I didn't think about how I was gonna do it. I just did it, and it actually turned out really good. And this campfire is still invisible. On the hair right here, this is the Examination Rig's hair. By default, it's just like this, and actually it doesn't have these holes in it, but I changed it to look like this by adding a solidify modifier. And a lot of the times when you do that, a lot of Z fighting happens like this. The way you'd fix that is just by deleting faces, which is why you see these holes here, because I deleted those faces to prevent Z fighting. So that's just what I did with the Examination Rig's hair. For this part, I actually didn't know how the lights worked in Eevee. Again, it was my first time using Eevee. And I don't know why all of this grass didn't have shadows. And the reason, because this light was on the other side of it. And if it was over here, then it would have shown the shadows for it. So I didn't know how that worked. So that's why all this grass doesn't have any shadows. And this world is just, whole thing is just two big plains duplicated. And it looks kind of different. You can tell where the edge of this one is. It's, wait, oh no, I'm mistaken. It's four worlds. Yeah, so like here's one right here, and then there's one right here, and then there's one here and one here. So it's all the same, it's for the same world, just duplicated. Not much to say here. For this sword, I actually didn't say anything about it earlier, but I just took the regular old Minecraft iron sword, and I replaced the blade with a bright white, and then the rest of it, except this little piece of the handle here, with just this very dark gray. Now, in this point of animating this, I finally figured out how the shadows worked with the lights in Eevee. So I had my light over here, and the shadows were mysteriously disappearing. And I was so confused, so I just tried to see what was going on. Then I eventually tried moving this light, and that figured out the whole problem for me, so yeah, that's great. And this huge thing in the ground is actually right next to the village that is later in the animation. So this pathway is actually connected to that very same village. So the pathway, the giant hole in the ground, and the village are all part of the same little world. So here's the village here. This villager, I really should have at least made some kind of movement for him, but he's just completely still throughout this entire thing. And the way I had the inside of this house light up is I just put these lights right here, just outside the window, to make it look like there was light coming from inside. Well, this light's actually inside the window, and the other one is more like in the middle of the window. I feel like this one was more effective though. Okay, so here is the stronghold. It is way bigger than necessary. All that's used is just this one room with a portal in it, and then the world itself is just this huge thing. Okay, so this plane right here is just a texture, like an end texture that I just textured a plane with, which doesn't look good. I think I could totally do better nowadays, but that is the best I could do at the time. Very low effort. So here we are in the actual end, and this environment texture is the same texture I used for that one plane. Again, very low effort. Could do better now. And for these things, they're actually animated, and I'm actually kind of proud of this animation. I know the original looks kind of different. I think this one's like moving around more, but this just goes up and down, and then these two move along with it. Okay, I actually don't think I have anything to say for this one. It took a lot of time to do. Okay, so this sword right here, it's right here at the beginning of the shot, and then it eventually hits him in the arm, and then as soon as it does that, the next frame, it switches to a different sword. So at first, it's this sword, this one that isn't connected to his arm, and then it switches to a different sword that is connected to his arm. So when I move him, it goes with him, and eventually disappears. So he just drop it, and I didn't have to disconnect it from the rig because I'm not moving the rig at all. Okay, so in this scene, the dragon, I rendered it separately. So the shader right here is not an emission, but so after I rendered this whole sequence, I went back and I made the material an emission like this, and I just brightened it up, and then so the light that's actually causing this is not the dragon. I don't think it's this light right here. That just keeps getting brighter and brighter until in the editing software I made it fade to white, but in Blender it's pretty bright too. Okay, so here's something you may have not seen if you didn't stick around to after the end screen. But I do show up at the end, and then I have myself get shot by these two skeletons that are just chilling in the water. And this water actually is massive, because if I scaled it down, then it just wouldn't work. So like this is what it would look like if I scaled it down. So it has to be way bigger, like that. Like that's better. That's why it has to be so big. And this arrow is actually stuck to the back of my head the whole time. If you didn't get the inside joke, these skeletons were in the first EV test that I did. So here's the start of Humble Beginnings. Okay, so when this block breaks, it's this right here. So if I go into pose mode, when I move this, it makes it more broken and less. So when this is breaking, it's basically just this moving down. And you can actually tell which block is going to break because this is the 1.14 texture and this isn't, so you can already tell. Oh, I probably should have prepped it. If I had prepped it with MC Prep, then it would have blended in more. You can tell which is 1.14 texture and what isn't. Oh, for this part, I rendered it with a different environment texture. I wanted it to seem like time was passing. Okay, so I unfortunately lost the file between the last one and this one because I accidentally overwrote it. What happens in this shot is the focal length, it starts as 30 and then it eventually goes to 60, and that's just that zooming in. I literally nothing to say about the scene. Oh, actually there is. The way I did the tree leaves and the grass blowing in the wind, there's actually an Arbiter 617 tutorial. I'll link it in the description if you want to follow it. But yeah, these characters over here. This is Slimacow. He's another Minecraft animator, and I decided to put him in here as just a cameo. Okay, so I wanted it to look very windy up in the mountains, so I made these trees. So if I go into the modifier here, I turned up the strength. Usually it's like 0.5 or 0.2. So it starts as 0.2, but then in this shot right here, so it starts as 0.2 right here, and then this shot, it goes all the way up to 1. So it's just really, it looks like it's very windy. And I know it looks bad with like the snow on top of it. I should have like joined them together. Oh, but in that case, that would have been, that moves the floor as well. Okay, that is very weird. Look at that. Alright, so for this scene right here, all of these blocks that he's placing are underneath this giant piece of land here. So they start out all the way down here, so these are all the blocks, and they move up every time he places a block. And then for this shot right here, the way I got this shadow to work is it's this giant plane right here, and it just moves up, and it looks like it's like him building the house. Not really anything to say here except for the fact I re-rendered this shot right here with a day environment texture again to show time passing. So this looks different from the actual shot in the animation. Okay, so for this part, this piece of the nether portal is part of the world, and then this block right here is just a separate piece. It starts again as being completely shrunken down, and then when he places it, it scales up. And then the one in his hand scales down as well. And then when he uses the flint and steel here, the fire actually shows up for a few frames, and then the portal scales up. And that is the end of that animation. Okay, wow, lost all of these textures somehow. This is my first animation using the Bar Productions rig, which is really good. I'll put a link in the description. Again, not much to say here, except for the fact that I didn't save it in this file, but after everything was done, I did the same thing that I did with the trees with the lava so that it was moving. The texture wasn't animated, it was just moving. I still used the Examination rig with these skins because I didn't feel like they needed this rig, because with these skins, they can't really have fingers. So the way I did the lighting in this animation was basically just this light right here. Actually, there were multiple lights, and they're just facing up. What I did to do these guys, okay, right, I'll show what I did to make them. So this is the Examination rig again, and if you scale it on the x-axis, the default scale for the head is this, and then I scaled it up to look like that, and then I have these extra objects, and I textured them with the same texture, and basically this is how I textured them. Alright, so for this scene, when the wither skeleton throws me off, we have all of these blocks. All these blocks right here aren't part of the world, obviously, because you can see this part's missing a texture when this one isn't. And all of these blocks are keyframed here, and then they move down. And I actually disabled the motion blur here, because when you watch it with the motion blur, it just looks like that. This part isn't missing a texture. That's good. I literally have nothing to say about this scene. Oh yeah, I accidentally overwrote the 8th scene with credits, so I might as well show how I did the credits right now. It's pretty different from what I do usually. So I just have the spotlight right here, and it moves onto the name. Okay, so this scene I actually took from the original first animations, the exact same shot from the original. Alright, so here we go. This is the final animation in the series. For this part right here, I have these little lights right on top of here. I felt like it looked cool if I added some lights there. I changed the animated enchanted effect here just a little bit so that it wasn't just like, originally it was just like a flat thing just moving along the side of it, but now it's actually like moving. It's hard to explain, but it's different and it looks better. If you want to copy it, again, here it is. It is slightly different from the sword. So this part, when the blocks, these soul sand and the wither skulls turn into the wither, as you can see right here, they just scale down and then the wither scales up. For this part, when I had this head on the wither get shot by an arrow, the glowing part of the eyes and the mouth was actually the same material as this, so I had to copy that over to a different material. And then strength was originally 5, and then I just brought that down to 0. And this is actually my first time using particles right here, when he gets hit by the wither skull head thing. And the particles actually come from his chest plate, so when he gets hit right here, particles don't come from the head, they come from the chest plate. And then for this part, when he brings his arm up, the arm is actually completely separate from the rig. And then for this part right here, when he breaks through the wall, he's, again, similar with the nether portal construction, they're separate from the actual world. So if I select this one, it selects all the glass in the entire world. And so these blocks were separate, so I just moved them when he came crashing in. For this shot right here, there's more particles. It's just a little bit, but there is some. And if I actually show that off camera here, it's actually his shield. He actually does come in for like 5 frames before the camera cuts. So he actually comes in here, and then his shield does a little explosion. And this shield is actually different from the shield he had the rest of the animation. It's basically just the same old shield, but I just took away a whole bunch of faces. Okay, so for this shot, when the skull comes straight through the wall, same thing that I did with the glass, separate objects. Again, I'm going crazy with the particles. It's, I think, this object right here. No, it's not. It's this. This is the object that emits all the particles. And then same thing that I did with the Ender Dragon. He was an emission the whole rest of the animation, but for this part, it starts as 1. It goes all the way up to 100. It looks very bright. And then for this part with the particles, it's his head that emits all of these particles. And I wanted it to go straight for the camera, which it kind of did. This beacon actually isn't going to the like sky limit or whatever, it's just right here. And then for the next shot, it scales all the way up to the top, so it can be ready for this shot right here, and it shows in the backgrounds. I didn't have it rotating because I forgot. And then for this part right here, when the camera goes inside this dirt block right here, it fades instantly to black. And the way it does that is that inside there's just a black cube, and it goes into the cube and it fades to black. Okay, so for this army right here, so I just had a regular old walk cycle of a zombie in one file, and then I appended it into this scene, and then I duplicated it 6 times, and then keyframed the base to be moving, and that's just how I made them walk. And then I did the same thing with the skeletons and the wither skeletons. Okay, so for these 2 new characters here, I thought these were some really cool designs that I made. This guy's got like shoulder pads, very simple, and then this one has spikes. That's just to show what I did for that. I basically just extruded that and then scaled it down to look like spikes. I really nailed it with the crown here. I think that looks really cool. And this guy's just overloaded with weapons. He's got 2 axes, a whole bunch of arrows, a bow, and a sword. I think I might improve these for the sequels that I'm planning to come out. Anyways, so that's it. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.